Hey, everybody, this is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series between writers. So, today on the show, I had author Jonathan Woods. Now, I didn't know Jonathan coming into this conversation. He was pitched to me by his PR person, and I looked him up, and he writes some weird, cool stuff. He describes it as gonzo noir and pulpy. So that intrigues me. So I wanted to talk to him. And he was a really interesting guy. You know, he's had this, he had a background or leanings towards, he majored in English and edited the university journal, but then went to law school and became a corporate lawyer for quite some time, and loved it, made some money, but never really was able to dedicate himself to writing. He said a couple novels during that time, but never really had the time to focus on them. And then in his 50s, he was given the opportunity to kind of cash out from that job and just dedicate himself fully to writing. So that's very cool. And it was just interesting to hear his journey going from not having the time to really explore writing to that is your full-time job. How are you going to approach it? How are you going to learn? What changes are you going to make? And, he kind of vacillates between novels and short fiction. And it was interesting to hear him talk about that as well. So it was a fantastic conversation. I feel like I learned from him. And he was definitely an interesting guy. So, and his new book is called Hog Wild, and that's coming out in September 2022, late August, September. And I won't ruin the teaser for it now because he mentions it in the interview. But it's a great premise, and if it were a Netflix show, I would watch the hell out of it. So I hope you enjoy this. This is my conversation with Jonathan Woods. Nice to meet you.
I'm a low tech kind of guy, so.
Oh yeah. So the last couple of years have probably been a struggle for you then, with all that required technology and meetings and all that kind of stuff. Where are you located right now?
Ooh, in your videos. Non-working member of society.
Where are you right now?
I'm in beautiful Dallas, Texas.
Ah, okay. Are you
101 today?
Yeah, if that's your definition of beautiful, then good for you. I spent years when I was a little kid, probably age 5 through 10, in Richardson, Texas. I lived in Richardson, Texas, just outside of Dallas there, but I haven't been back in a long time. And now who is that beautiful animal of yours?
This is Miss Pinky. It was a golden Shih Tzu.
Oh.
She was from Miami Beach. And she was dancing in a bar when we found her.
Isn't that how we find all of our greatest connections? The ones dancing in bars.
So,
have you now? Did you grow up in Dallas?
No, I'm a kind of a coast to coast baby. LA, New York, Providence, Ohio. You name it, I've lived there.
Oh, wow. Why did you move around? That was as a kid, or that was like all throughout your life? Did you move around a lot as a kid?
My father was like a mid-level finance guy and just couldn't stick with the same company. So he kept moving. And then when I graduated from law school, I got a job with a big high-tech company and they kept moving me. So.
Okay. So, but you were used to it at least, because that's tough as a kid to be moving around a lot. I did it a couple times, but you're reestablishing friendships and you're the new kid in the school. And was that tough for you?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons I became a writer, because, when you're the new kid, you're always kind of the outsider.
Right.
So books became very important to me.
Yeah. I mean, I've certainly heard that before from other writers for sure, especially the kids of parents who are in the military who are really just constantly going there to different places. Did you grow up with siblings?
Nope. Number one and only right here. Spoiled rotten.
So moving around a lot and being an only child definitely lends itself to disappearing into books. I think.
Yeah, kind of a nerdy existence, definitely.
What do you remember what you were reading when you were a kid?
What I distinctly remember is my grandmother, who lived with us for a while when we were in California. My grandmother used to read to me all the time, and particularly Treasure Island
Mm-hmm.
by Robert Louis Stevenson.
Sure.
And right in the middle of reading, she would suddenly stop and say, "What a book to read to a baby!" It's a pretty violent
Yeah,
tale.
it is.
But yeah, I grew up. I read a lot of science fiction when I was in high school. I was a member of the Philadelphia Science Fiction Society.
Okay.
There was me and another young guy named John Davison, who went on to become a famous movie producer. He made
Yep. Cool.
RoboCop and some stuff. And then there were a bunch of old guys, so it was a very weird scene in Philadelphia. But
Huh.
I was
Interesting.
escaping the suburbs. I was in high school in this opulent suburb called Haddonfield,
Okay.
across the
Okay.
river, and hated it. So I ventured into the big city.
Huh. What were you looking for? Like what did you hate that you thought that the big city was going to provide you as a high schooler?
Well, I mean, it was the opportunity to see the world and see the bad side, the good side, as opposed to sort of this blissful kind of nirvana of suburbia that I lived in. So
Yeah, I would think Center City, Philly back then was probably not blissful.
well, it was kind of cool. I mean,
Was it?
there was a bookstore on Lower Market Street, no longer there, that had pulp magazines from the
Yeah.
30s and 40s, and they were just stacked up the wall.
Hmm.
I used to go in there. There was a famous bookstore up by the Greyhound bus station, which was in a really crappy part of town. And this bookstore, on one side, it had a vast selection of porno magazines.
Yep.
On the other side, it was a very literary bookstore. So it had books like Naked Lunch and Richard Brautigan's books, Trout Fishing in America. It had Ginsberg. It had all this. And so I discovered all these amazing writers.
Which side of the bookstore was more crowded whenever you would go in? So you're discovering like Ginsberg and Burroughs, as a teenager, and that's that's a bit of a head trip to be reading, as a high schooler. But do you remember just being sucked into that, and also the pulp stuff as well?
Yeah, I mean both. I mean, they were all of that kind of became a great influence because I'm really kind of a pulp writer today.
Right.
My books would qualify, I think, as definitely very very pulpy.
Yeah. So
of all those writers, I think my favorite is still Richard Brautigan.
Okay. So that was a big influence for you, or at least a writer who sucked you in as a reader, if not necessarily an inspiration.
Absolutely.
And were you? I mean, so I'm just curious. So as you're doing this in your teens and you're thinking about college, and I know you ultimately ended up at law school, but what was the thought process of what you wanted to do after high school, or was there one?
Well, I ended up going undergraduate to McGill University. Again, I had actually been accepted to Kenyon College, which is in a tiny little town in central Ohio. And I went out there. It was a gorgeous campus.
Yep.
In a town with about 3 stores.
Right. Yeah. I think my niece looked at that, and same. Yeah, I saw pictures, and it was like beautiful, like a little liberal arts college, right? But there was like, that was it. That was.
It Oh, it's pretty famous. I mean, it has the Kenyon Review, and it has
Hmm.
famous poets that used to teach there and stuff. But suddenly I had this sort of freak out that I couldn't stand the idea of being in this little remote town. So
Right.
um, I
Yeah,
ended up
that's like being stuck in suburbia. You got to find your Philadelphia.
in Montreal, which is a
Oh,
fabulous town,
absolutely.
and yeah, at McGill University.
Yeah.
So I had a great time there.
And then you went on to law school.
Right.
And what were your, do you remember what your intentions were? You wanted to litigate, you wanted to practice, you wanted to go into corporate law, or you just weren't sure?
Well, there was kind of a gap between undergraduate. Um, Let me just go back and say that I majored in English at McGill, and
Got it.
actually in my last year, I edited the literary magazine, which was called Al Cool.
Okay.
It was a sold in Quebec. It's just an extremely cheap liquor that you kind of mix with something.
Got it.
But it's also there's a famous book of poetry written by a Frenchman, I think in the 19th century, called Alcools, and
Hmm.
his name was Apollinaire, and so that kind of inspired the title. Plus, we were in a French-speaking province,
Yeah.
so,
Right.
but that was fun.
Sure.
Law school, I went strictly to figure out some way to make a bunch of money.
That's one way, but it's a lot of work. I'm sure it was. I can't imagine, but I've heard that it's a pretty tremendous push to get through law school.
Yeah, I mean, once you figure it out after by the about halfway through the first year, you kind of figure out what's going on.
Okay.
And once you get there, then it's just it's almost more boring than challenging.
Right.
It's just, tons and tons of reading.
Right. That's what I've heard.
And, but ultimately I ended up working for a high tech company, a multinational, and I had a great time doing it. Traveled the world, went to Japan, Europe, Mexico.
Okay, so you leave law school, and that's the first job that you get, and you stay with that company for some time.
Well, I was with a small firm for a couple of years, and then
Okay.
I joined a company called Nortel,
Okay.
made digital switching equipment, and it was I had to raise a family. We were having kids, so it was good.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm always curious to talk to people who have had, secondary careers, as that writing wasn't necessarily their first career. I mean, and so for example, for me, I still have another full-time job, so it's a matter of, I got to figure out how to make this work, because like you said, you got to raise a family, you got to provide support, you've got to, provide stability, or at least assist with that. And so it's, the idea of that I'm going to quit and become a writer is insane, quite frankly. Like, that's the dream of a 20-year-old. But once you're 40, you're like, no, look at the numbers on this. This is a terrible industry. Right. So while you were practicing law for that multinational, did you have a sense of like, or were you writing? Was that something that was kind of tugging at you?
Yeah, it definitely was. Yeah, I was toying with writing. I wrote a couple of books that have never been published.
When did you do that? Like, how were you working at the time, or that was earlier?
No, I was working as a lawyer.
Got it.
Yeah. And I just never had really the time to focus on it. And then I hit the age of 54. Nortel hit the rocks, so to speak. Mm-hmm. 2 out of every 3 people employed by them was shot over a period of 2 years.
Jeez.
And somebody came into my office one day and said, well, I'm going to have to demote you, take your big title away, but we'll have the same benefits, same salary, or we could offer you this check.
Right. 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 An early retirement package.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So, or an opportunity to change course. I
Right.
like to think of it that way. So I took the check, started writing, and 7 years later, my first book, Bad Juju and Other Tales of Madness and Mayhem,
Hmm.
came out to some acclaim.
So, do you think, looking back on that, during that moment when you were taking that check, was that almost like a relief? Do you ever look back and think, had that not happened, had Nortel continued to thrive and employed me, I'd still be there and I'd still be thinking I don't have enough time to write?
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, it was a very demanding job. I mean,
I'm
it was
sure. Yeah.
fun. I enjoyed it because I was basically a deal lawyer. So I went out and negotiated, the paper that wallpapered the deal, and a lot of international travel. So it was really fun, but um, very demanding. So
Yeah.
I was very happy to have this opportunity to change course.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's so interesting because I think about that. So I'm 52. So 2 years younger than you were at that time. And, you think you go through that in your mind of like, what would it take for me to quit my job and dedicate myself full time to anything else, writing or anything else? And that number gets higher the older you get because you're making money in a corporation and you're getting used to, a style of living, and you're like, oh, that would have to be a big number. But I guess it was big enough in your case to let you do that. But there must have been that must have been a little scary. I mean, were there times where you're like, I should probably start looking for something else?
I never went back. No.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was ready to change lifestyles, and
so have you let your law license expire?
It's on what you call, I don't know what's the right word,
Probation.
Okay. Yeah, probation. That's Mr. Giuliani.
Right.
And that.
Yeah, that's interesting. So that because that's a big step, right? That's kind of saying this phase of my life is in the past, and you could go get back, I'm sure, but that's kind of a line of demarcation. It seems like to let your license kind of be inactive.
Well, when they came in and offered me the check, my wife and I were about to go to Playa del Carmen in Mexico for a vacation. So I said, "Can I give you an answer when I come back?" And my wife and I talked about it for about a week and figured that we had enough cash in the bank or whatever that it would be okay.
Yeah.
So in Mexico, I don't know if you can see.
Yeah. You're wearing a choker. Yeah.
Yeah. So I went out and I bought this in Playa del Carmen from a little vendor.
Uh-huh.
I put it on. I bought it for $1, 10 pesos at the time.
Uh-huh.
And I've never taken it off.
Wow. So that is your writer's talisman.
It is.
That's great. That's fantastic. So what was your...
And I have a line of naked women as my muses. So that's
Do you?
Correct. But...
Okay. What was your those 7 years? What was that journey like? What were you discovering about yourself as a writer? Because, going from somebody who, was an editor of a review and then a couple books, but over a long period of time, now you have all this time. Did you see yourself grow? Did you see yourself doubt yourself? Like, what was that journey like for you?
Well, I just, first of all, I was working on first on a really long novel.
Okay.
And I'd completed, I think, a first draft of it. And I went to a book reading with the world famous Michael Connolly.
Sure.
And I came up to have my turn at getting my book signed by him. And I kind of looked him in the eye and I said, "You ever read manuscripts?" And he rolls his eyes at me.
Of course.
And then I'm just standing there not saying anything. And finally he says, okay, he said, send it to me, contact my web person and send the manuscript to me. And I did. And a couple of months went by and I never heard from him. And I figured, well, he must have blown me off.
Yeah.
And out of the blue, I get this 3-page hand typed letter from Michael Connolly telling me everything that was wrong with the book.
Yep.
But obviously, he had seen enough that he felt like it was worth his time to write the letter.
That's fantastic.
So, I mean, I'm always amazed when you hit a big writer like that, whose time is extremely valuable, and he gives us of it to someone like me who's never had a story published.
Yeah.
And so after that, I put that book in the bottom drawer and started another one.
but it's all building blocks, right? So it's not like, oh, that was a waste of time. It's like, okay, that was an experience that I had that's a foundation for something that comes next. I mean, if you have 20 published books, your 21st is being built on those 20, you know?
Absolutely.
So
and then I started applying to writers' conferences like Breadloaf and Swanee, and I got into them. In fact, I got into Breadloaf and Swanee in the same summer. One was in July and one was in August.
Great.
And they're both about 2 weeks long and totally exhausting because there's lots of drinking and carousing.
I just came back from Thriller Fest in June, and that was 5 straight nights of cocktail parties.
Yeah, exactly. So,
but that's important, though, right? The networking, isn't that? Don't you think that is critical?
Yes. Plus, it also gives you an incentive. I mean, you feel like someone out there is reading your submission, including your little piece of fiction that you sent along with it, and saying, well, this is not just garbage. There's something
right.
And so after that summer, I switched from writing a novel to writing short stories. And I worked on them for another 2-3 years, maybe.
And why was that? Was that just you wanted that change of pace? You didn't want that like massive like albatross hanging over your head of like, I got to finish this book?
Kind of, yeah. I was like saying, I'm not going to waste another year. I'm going to see if I can do something with some short stories. And then I started to get them published online. There was a website called 3 a.m. Magazine over in the UK that's kind of an avant-garde magazine. I got some stories in there. And then in the US, I got stories in a place called Plots with Guns and Thuglit and some other sites like that. And that really is an inspiration when you start to get stuff published.
Right. It's momentum. Whatever that momentum is, it's a yes and not a no in an industry that's full of no's. But what was that shift like for you? Because I've written maybe a dozen short stories in 20 years. And I don't mind it, but I'm not good at it. Because I don't have the time. I don't have the space to have things breathe the way that I'm used to having them breathe. So it's a real challenge for me. What was it like for you? Was it like, oh, I think I'm a better storyteller in short form fiction?
I don't know better.
Yeah.
But it was certainly a different experience. And I mean, I love doing both, frankly. Right now I'm working on a third book of short stories. So,
okay.
I mean, I have with the new book with Hog Wild, that's my 5th book, and 2 of the previous books are short story collections. So I really enjoy the form because you can, once you get an idea, you work on it for 2-3 weeks, something like that, polish it like a diamond, and then you set it aside a little bit to kind of cook, and then you take it back and do some final stuff to it. But
do you have characters that appear in both short stories and your novels?
Not really. I mean, I have a lot of characters named Bill, but none of them.
Why?
None of them.
Why is that? Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I just like Bill.
Yeah, yeah, that's well, it's it's a name that you're not going to necessarily attach any much, information to, so that it's kind of a blank slate kind of a name. And I like those as well. I like very just kind of traditional English names, like UK names. Jonathan is a great example, because it's just, I don't know, it's like a blank slate, and that just makes it easier to write the character for me.
Right. I never got into writing series characters. I don't know if you do that or
I don't. Yeah, I have 8 novels out, and they're all standalones.
okay.
Because I don't have anything against series, but I'm like, what other interesting things can happen to the same person? Because I don't write from like a detective's point of view or something like that, where they're, of course they're always going to be embroiled in something interesting. If you write kind of about an everyday person, that kind of extraordinary stuff is happening to them, that's kind of a one-shot deal, I think.
Yeah, I did in my first novel, which is called A Death in Mexico, and it's actually my most traditional work because it's a police procedural
Hmm.
set mostly in San Miguel de Allende in
Oh,
the
yep.
mountains
That's
of
a beautiful
Mexico.
place. Yep. I'm familiar with
There's
it.
there's a female character that's kind of a mid-level character in the whole story, and in my second novel, which is called Kiss the Devil Goodnight, she came back as a major character.
Hmm.
So I enjoyed doing that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. That's fun.
the stories otherwise are not linked in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. And I find that personally the most interesting because I don't outline. So to me, the joy of writing is sitting down when I write. I only write for an hour a day. I'm like, what happens next? I have no idea. And if you're writing a series, then you kind of have to know what happens next, for the next 3 books. So the joy of is all about the discovery for me. I don't know if you outline or not.
I absolutely don't outline at
Yeah.
all. No.
Yeah.
I mean, I may make occasional little notes as something occurs to me, but other than that, yeah, I mean, I can imagine Michael Connolly's house. He must have a room where the entire walls are covered with charts of
Right. Right.
which character did what to who and when.
I mean, I did that once with one book that I got about 150 pages in, and I just kept throwing stuff at my protagonist, and then I'm like, none of this makes any sense. It was fun to write, but I'm like, now I got to sit and figure out what any of this means. But when you tell people, like when people ask you, like, so do you know the endings to your books before you write them, and you say no, people are always amazed by that, and I'm amazed that you would know your ending. Like, how do you? This whole journey that your characters are going to take, how would you possibly know until 80% in how it can end? I mean, I don't know. That's how I sense.
I totally agree with you on that. I mean, writing to me would be just very formulaic if you just did this huge spent 3 months filling in the gaps. I mean,
Yeah.
what's the point?
Right. Because if I can figure out the ending now, then it's probably not a very creative ending, and probably my readers are going to see that ending coming. If it just kind of occurs to me after months of my subconscious hopefully working, that something like just sucks into me, I'm like, this is it, then it's going to surprise hopefully everybody. But like you said, and it's not formulaic, because that's you're taking the joy out of writing. If it's just
Exactly.
filling in I mean, if I know what I'm going to write, it's great in a way, because it's easy, but it isn't as fun of the discovery.
And I guess I've been lucky in the sense that I've never really uh, had to make a lot of money in my writing.
Right.
So, uh, I don't have to worry about what I write. I write what I want to write, and there's
Yeah.
a real freedom to that.
There
Doesn't
is, yeah, but it's also even if you're not making a lot of money writing, you're still in a way on a career path, and at some point readers will come to expect, you know, this is the Jonathan Woods novel that I've come to know. And then if something else comes out that's not that, for better or for worse, there will be a reaction to that. And
Right.
that's at least something to be that I've learned. You've got to be thoughtful about a little bit. And I've had some pushback because I've written a book recently that like, this is just a book I want to write. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do with it. And my editor's like, I don't know what to do with this. And, and now I'm like, well, do I just not publish this thing after writing it for a year and a half, or, just because it was something I wanted to write? So it becomes weird. It becomes a little bit strange for sure.
Well, my books have always been published by small presses because I guess they're the only ones that are gutsy enough to publish the lurid trash that I write. But I've off and on sought to find an agent without a great deal of luck. But
Yeah.
I last year or a couple of years ago, when I was still living in Key West, I met Madison Smart Bell.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you'd call him a literary writer, and he also teaches at Goucher in Baltimore. But he also works, I guess, on the side as a literary agent, which I didn't. I only found out fairly recently.
That's interesting.
I sent him my book Hog Wild, and I said, "So would you like to represent us?" He read it, and he said, "I wouldn't have any idea where to send this." Which sort of, that sort of amazed me about publishing today.
Yeah.
That, you write a book that's, I don't know, call it what you want, gonzo noir,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, but it's not your run-of-the-mill private eye detective novel or your run-of-the-mill thriller, but it's really well written and very funny and very satiric and so on. And
it doesn't fit into a bucket. Yeah.
It doesn't know where to send that book.
Yeah. I mean, when you say, when you talk about writing filth, like, what would you say is a hallmark of your writing? Like, what do you love to write about? Like, what scene you get to a scene like, I can't wait to write this scene. What does that scene look like to you?
Well, my books are very much pulp driven,
right?
Although I would call them literary pulp, if that
right.
is a contradiction in terms. So, you have the normal tropes of gunfights and knife fights and bar fights and
sex,
and strippers, and but it's all written very much tongue in cheek. I mean, the basic premise of Hog Wild is about an ex-special forces guy who comes down to a ranch, big cattle ranch in Texas, to rid them of their feral hog problem. But the feral hogs have become super intelligent, and they organize and they fight back, and they engage in things like jihad. So I'm actually expecting that there might be a fatwa put out on me for writing this book.
Yeah. It didn't go through a sensitivity reader. But that's an interesting. I don't know if you saw it's different, but Nicolas Cage's movie Pig.
Oh yeah.
Which is a fantastic movie. But I love that premise, for example, because hogs are intelligent animals in general anyway. And I love the idea of unionizing against this ex-special forces guy who comes in, who thinks he's got a probably pretty easy task ahead of him. That's a movie I could totally picture.
Well, I sent it to Harmony Korine, but I haven't heard from her. Read my previous novel and wrote me back and said, "I loved your book," but that was the end of it. So
yeah. That's fantastic. And your book comes out in September, is that right?
Yeah, end of August.
August,
actually. Yeah,
that's exciting. And then I assume you've been Are you going back to short fiction? You got another novel in you after this?
I've been thinking it. Well, right now I'm writing short stories
Yeah.
again, getting them actually published online at a couple of sites. One is called Yellow Mama,
Hmm.
which is the name of the electric chair in Georgia,
Jesus Christ.
because
Of course it is.
because when they built it back in the 30s, it was they built it in a building right next door to a highway maintenance building, and
Hmm.
they had this all this yellow paint for painting yellow lines on the
Oh, right.
street. So they used the same color to paint the electric chair.
Oh my God. That's so macabre.
And the other website that's publishing my stories now is called Horror Sleaze Trash.
Hmm.
That sounds like a really high class website.
It sounds like you're having a blast, man. Like,
I
yeah,
am.
I mean, you're living the writer's dream. You know, you got the big check, and you were just exploring literary creations that are interesting to you. And I mean, that's really the pinnacle of a writer's success, I think.
Well, you know, that's true. I have had a great run here from 2010 when the first book came out, Bad Juju, and I was living in Key West for about 5 years, and I met this young filmmaker there named Quincy Perkins. He actually is a conch,
Hmm.
which means you're born and raised in Key West.
Got it.
And he's super talented. And I worked with him on a couple of little short films. We made a book trailer
Hmm.
for my second book. And then we did a couple of what are called film challenges, where you have 72 hours to write, film, and
Oh,
edit
wow.
an
Jeez.
8-minute film with they require you to put a certain line of dialogue in and a certain
Right.
character and a certain piece of um, a certain item.
Yeah.
So
That's cool.
we had a great working relationship. So when I had a story come out in an anthology called Dallas Noir from Akashic Books, I gave it. It's called Swingers Anonymous. It's another story. And I gave it an advance copy to my friend Quincy, and he said, let's make a movie out of this. So we raised about $15,000 on Kickstarter.
Hmm.
And then we found some locations up in Miami, got a film crew together. And in the 4.5 days, we filmed this movie, Swingers Anonymous. And then he spent another 6 months editing it. And it came out to about 25 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And it premiered at the Key West Film Festival.
Oh, how cool.
And then it went on to play in Miami, New York, LA, Vancouver, San Antonio, and it went to Cannes. And
Wow.
we went to Cannes, and we had such a ball.
I can imagine. That's that's definitely a bucket list thing. Not, even just to go as a as just a tourist, much less a participant. That's fantastic.
It was a blast. So I'm hoping that Hog Wild will, become a series on Netflix.
Yeah, I mean,
Except I don't have any agent that can sell it. So
it's like Watership Down, but with like hogs, and like you could have all that dialogue between the hogs. I don't know. I can see it. I would watch the hell out of that on Netflix. I'll tell you that much, Jonathan. Well, listen, so we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to do a quick storytelling. I've chosen 3 books randomly off my shelf, and I'm going to have you pick one of them. And then we're going to pick a random page and a random sentence, and I'm going to read that sentence. And then either you can go first or I go first, but we basically just continue the story from that sentence for a couple minutes, and then I'll call it quits. But I've got John Katzenbach's The Madman's Tale, Stephen Hunter's Black Light, and Gillian Flynn's first book, Sharp Objects. So choose one of those.
So I'll go with Black Light, I guess.
Okay, and then pick a page between 1 and 500.
Ooh. How do you write that many pages?
I know. So pick a page between 1 and 500.
Oh, for me to do
Yeah,
it.
for you to do it. Yeah.
343.
343. And then pick a sentence between 1 and 10.
11.
Got it. I can do 11. There are more than 10 sentences on this page. Let's see. All right. It's very basic. They're talking about a vault. So he spun the dial and opened the old vault.
It opened with a loud squeaking sound because the hinges were rusty. A smell was the first thing that emerged before he even opened the door. He pulled it back. Inside was a skull, still covered with bits of flesh. In the skull's mouth were 45 golden teeth, each one with a diamond inset. He took his hammer and knocked out the teeth and dragged them into his leather gunny sack.
All right. So I'll go. He figured the teeth would be more than enough to pay the debt he owed, but he couldn't quite figure out how he was going to sell those teeth. Who was going to buy them? But he didn't have time to think about that now, because even though the plan had been going perfectly up until this point, he heard the door open in the room next door.
You want me to go next?
Now you go.
When the door opened, a body stood there, headless. It advanced toward him, arms outstretched. Tears of blood dripped from the empty space where the head should have been. My teeth, give me my teeth, said the headless body.
He considered the figure, opened up his satchel, pulled out the skull. He raised it in both hands and kind of felt a little bit bad about the whole thing and realized this person just needed to have his teeth back. With the arms outstretched from the body, he placed the skull into those hands.
The body tucked the skull under his arm, dropped into a football player hunt, and charged toward him, knocking him on his ass. Just then, from the ceiling, an explosion occurred, and a beautiful superheroess in a skimpy outfit leaped down and saved him from the monster.
I think we call it there. That was a pulpy tale. That was fantastic. There was a lot going on with that story.
There was.
That was fun. Good job.
You do this every time?
I do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I've done about 75 of these. So it's always like, where's this going to go? What are we going to do? And it's always interesting to see, like, it usually gets dark pretty fast. But, I've also had I've interviewed nonfiction writers, journalists, people who don't really do a lot of fiction. But it's still really fun to see how people's brains work and how you have to accept each other's premise and just go forward with it. I think it's a good challenge, I think.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, well, it's kind of like those film challenges I was telling you about,
right.
Where you have, a
right.
weekend to do this 8-minute film.
Right. You have to be firing on all cylinders creatively and to get it all done. Well, what a pleasure to meet you, Jonathan. It was really interesting to kind of hear your story to get to where you are now. And I'm very excited for Hog Wild. That sounds fantastic.
Well, it's very funny. It's very fast, and it definitely tells a good story about how crummy humans are.
Yep. We don't need stories for that. We all know, but yeah, I hear you. So we're rooting for the Hogs.
Rooting for the Hogs. Okay.
Awesome. Nice to meet you, and congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Take care, Jonathan.
Good luck with your writing as well.
Much appreciated. Take care.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
That was my conversation with Jonathan Woods. It was super interesting. And I love his little anecdote about how he bought that necklace in Mexico for $1 on the day that he kind of left his job and has worn it ever since. So if you want to find out more about Jonathan, you can just go to his website, which is southernnoir.com. And if you want to find out about me, subscribe to my newsletter, or check my event dates, just go to my website at carterwilson.com. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I know I certainly enjoyed talking to Jonathan. More episodes coming out soon. In the meantime, thank you as always for watching and or listening. Take care.